Excited to have Dom Amore of the Hartford Courant back on to go around the horn, talk a bunch of different topics. So, Dom, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jared. It's so hard to get on a podcast these days because Dan Hurley does them all. So I'm glad you're able to squeeze me in here. There's
I,
no
I
doubt.
I
Thank
I
you.
got you in there. Always can make time for you, Dom. I want to start with this. You mentioned Dan Hurley. Obviously, the UConn men and their run to back-to-back titles, the talk of the state. I love talking to you from your perspective as you're looking at different starting lines throughout the year. What
Mm.
sticks out to you the most when you look back on what we just saw over the past, 4 or 5 months here? Actually, past 2 years.
Well, what sticks out for me is just how hard it is to do what they just did. They made it look easy,
Yeah.
but it's so hard to do. It's hard to put a team together in 1 year and have it mesh. And he's essentially done that 2 years in a row. Because remember, after the loss to New Mexico State, he lost a few guys, brought in a bunch of transfers, really rebuilt the team around those three big guys. Then he lost those three big guys and rebuilt the team in one offseason around what was left. So it's very, very hard to do that. And other teams that have repeated did it with basically the same team 2 years in a row. Or way back in the day when UCLA seven-peated, those were the days when everybody stayed 4 years and you kind of had a gradual roster turnover every year, like
Yeah.
like a conventional program. To do what he's done, which is basically start almost from scratch 2 years in a row and win the whole thing both years, very hard to do. And because he's done it, you're not going to rule out the possibility that he could do it a third time, even though that would seem almost impossible. But he's done it twice now. So how could you doubt that he could do it a third time?
Yeah. One of the key pieces to the run the past couple of years is been Tristan Newton. When he came in, was one of the more heralded transfers at the time. But he's done the past 2 years, made up to the Huskies of honors there up on the wall. What are your thoughts on the job he did as the point guard of this team the past couple of years? And where do you put him in kind of the pantheon of UConn guards when you think about that list they have?
Well, he has a unique spot in that because he is a transfer and he only played 2 years. He was both a scorer and a point guard. But I think he just had a great supporting cast and he worked so well within that supporting cast. UConn had a tremendous number of assists, but it wasn't one point guard getting all the assists. Everybody got assists the way they moved the ball. And Jim Calhoun mentioned to me and kind of reiterated something that I was thinking already. This was like watching the Princeton offense at full speed. So uh, in terms of, you might argue that a Kemba Walker or a Shabazz Napier or maybe some of the other guys maybe had to carry a bigger load on their one teams than Tristan has these last two. But I think as far as functioning within a team and being kind of the point man and the quarterback out there, you'd have to put him right up there with the best of any of them.
Another guy on the roster who obviously sticks out. You think one and done. You usually think freshman, but you got a one and done in UConn in Cam Spencer, a guy who I
Mm.
know Dan Hurley called basically a clone of himself. What
Mm.
was how'd you feel the impact of him this year and how he's going to go down as one of those UConn players? When you look at a guy who only got to spend a year here.
Well, again, he only spent the 1 year there, so it's not quite the same as some of the others, but he won a championship, which is also not the same as some of the others who stayed 3, 4 years and didn't win one.
Yeah.
Uh, but again, it was a unique team in a new era, a different era of college basketball, and it was a perfect team, perfectly put together for this era of college basketball.
Yeah.
So I don't know that you can necessarily compare any of these players to any others or this team to any other, because really from starting a couple of years ago, it's a completely different landscape. But you can only compare players and teams by how well they dominate the teams that they play. And this team dominated the teams that it played. And this coach conquered this landscape, as well as it could possibly be done by anyone.
What do you think was the most impressive kind of feat that this team was able to pull off over the past year?
Just winning all these games by double digits, certainly they rolled through the Big East the way Jim Calhoun's teams used to, and the way it didn't look like the way the Big East was today, that was doable to go 18 and just with 20 games
Yeah.
to go 18-2 in the Big East. That didn't seem a few years ago like it was doable. You know, that Villanova's championship teams didn't do it. UConn's championship team went 13-7 last year. So that regular season, I thought was pretty darn impressive. But again, to just roll through the tournament with winning every game as easily as they did, and there weren't a lot of upsets like there were last year. They had to beat some high quality teams, particularly the last one,
Yeah.
to do it. So it's hard. It's just how easy they made it look. Something that's very, very hard to do.
Yeah. As we kind of have gone through some of these guys on the roster, I want to touch on a couple guys who have already declared going to the NBA draft, and that's Steph Castle and Donovan Clingan. You kind of gone through a little bit of a lull in the early part of Dan Hurley's days, and then the latter part of the Ollie days when they weren't sending guys to the NBA. What do you think it says about the program to have two of these guys who have performed at such a high level at UConn, and you're talking lottery picks coming out of here again?
Well, Jared, that's the whole thing. They had 13 lottery picks in 18 years between Danielle and Drummond and Lamb,
Yeah.
right? They had 13 lottery picks in 18 years. Then they didn't have any lottery picks for 10 years. And that's when you saw the program go, kind of go south a little bit. And, I could still remember some of the Dick Vitale on a national broadcast kind of lamenting that UConn just didn't have the kind of firepower that you're used to seeing a UConn team has. So they go hand in hand. Lottery picks, NBA type players, that kind of talent goes hand in hand. And you know what it does, and I know I pointed this out a couple of weeks ago and got a little bit of flack for it, but it shows you, Kevin Ollie's achievement to win a championship and knock off all those high-powered, blue bloods and Hall of Fame coaches without a lottery pick,
Yeah.
with only one player who had any significant time and really not very significant time in the NBA, in Shabazz. To do what he did without that kind of firepower was pretty darn impressive.
I loved his comments when someone asked him at a press conference, Kevin Ollie, that is, about how his team, his UConn championship team, would match up against this championship team, and him talking about having those tiny guards that could press up you, but very different rosters when you compare the two, which I think hits at what you were just talking about there.
Yeah, I mean, he had Phil Nolan was his big guy, so I don't think Phil Nolan against Donovan Clingan would be a very good matchup for Kevin's teams.
When you think about how you've covered sports in the state, how big of a storyline is it to see a guy like Donovan Clingan, guy who's grown up here, stayed here for high school, going to public school, now really truly making himself a name for himself at UConn the past few years, and now ultimately going to be a lottery pick?
Yeah, when you add that what he did in high school, because don't forget they were undefeated, they were state champs, they probably would have won more than one if it wasn't for the pandemic. Then he comes to UConn and does what he does here. Arguably the most successful player in the history of Connecticut basketball. I don't know of anyone who had anywhere near that kind of success at that level. And you think about all the greats, John Williamson and Sly Williams, and some who went on to have long careers in the NBA. But as far as a Connecticut guy going to UConn, doing what he did, and now he's likely to go to the NBA, and I think have a long career there. You could argue that he's the most significant or important in-state product that Connecticut's ever produced.
Yeah. As you look at this team from a historic context, I know you're my history guy, Dom. Where do you rank this championship team compared to the other UConn championship teams? Because I feel like that's kind of the buzzy talk coming out of this championship.
The 04 team was fabulous. The 99 team was fabulous. Maybe the other ones maybe got hot at the right time, but I would guess you'd have to put it. I would put it up there with the 99 and 04 team, but I don't know if they would beat the
Yeah.
99 or 04 team. Those teams probably may have had more talent actually, with Emeka, Ben Gordon,
Mhm.
those guys. But as far as the offense that this team ran and the way they ran it would be very difficult for any team, any college team to beat, especially college teams that had a lot of talent, but maybe not 23, 24-year-old guys like they did. This team had the one freshman, but he played like a professional. He played like a pro. So, what would happen if this team played the '04 team? I mean, if you ask the '04 guys, they would say barbecue chicken. I think that was Rashad Anderson's answer. The '99 team with Rip, what Rip was, and it'd be hard to beat him. But I would have to put this team right up there with those teams.
What was it like getting to be along for the ride and kind of get to hear from Jim Calhoun? Because I know you've mentioned you've talked to him a number of times about this team and getting to hear his thoughts, having been a coach of so many of those dominant UConn teams in the past.
Well, he's a very hard guy to please, and yet as the season went along, he just was on board as far as how good this team was. And a couple of weeks before the tournament, he spelled out to me privately. I'll say it here because it's after the fact now, but he spelled out to me privately what a UConn Purdue game would look like. And he said he didn't think Purdue had any chance to beat UConn because their guards weren't fast enough, and that UConn they wouldn't be. UConn would. He said the big guy would get his points, but everybody else UConn was shut down, and that it went exactly the way he spelled it out. And when I mentioned that to him afterward, he said, "Well, 50 years of coaching will do that, So, so yeah, it was quite a. But yeah, he and of course, he revealed the story, and Dan talked about it as well. The conversation they had Dan's first or second week on the job, and how important that was. So, Jim's the patriarch of this thing, and he's really he's really into that patriarch role.
Yeah.
And Dan and the players are into having him in that patriarch role.
Yeah.
So it's really been great. And if they ever do a movie about these teams, I think Bill Murray should play Jim Calhoun and come in and give his pep talks, because I think he'd be able to do it.
I'd love to hear Bill Murray with the Jim Calhoun accent. I think that'd make for a good movie there.
Yeah.
Moving on a bit from the men's team, the other big storyline this year was the UConn women going through another tough season injury wise, but ultimately making it to the Final Four and really giving it their all. What were your thoughts on this team? Because it seems like this was, just from my opinion, one of Gino's better jobs he's done in a long
Yeah,
time.
it was a really bad year for the Gino can't coach anymore crowd.
Yeah.
And then he goes and gets the number one recruit in the country out of the Carolinas after the day after getting knocked off. So it was a really bad year for the Gino can't recruit anymore crowd also. No, he did a great job, and he's more of a grandfather figure to these players now. He's gone from being a big brother figure in '95 to a father figure later on, to now being more of a grandfather figure. But they play their tails off for him, and they execute what he wants. And he got as much out of this team as he possibly could.
Yeah.
And I would have to believe that if even one of those players that was hurt were available, if Aubrey Griffin was available,
Mm-hmm.
we might, they might have been up on the bus with the men at the parade too. So, they were so close, with what they had, that you got to feel like, boy, if they had Aubrey Griffin and AZ Fudd, which is what they might very well have won number 12.
Yeah. How do you feel now looking at that team heading into next season, knowing, who's coming back and hopefully, knock on wood, everyone's staying healthy?
I mean, if they stay healthy, they can win it all. You're not only are you going to have Paige back, but you're going to have a 23-year-old Paige back.
Yeah.
You're going to have AZ Fudd back, you figure. And you're going to have players on the bench that Gino knows can play because of what they did this year. So if you've got AZ Fudd playing, and now you've got, Ashlyn Shade playing behind her, you got Aubrey Griffin playing, and maybe you've got some of these, now obviously Aaliyah Edwards is going to be hard to replace. And a lot of people feel, including I think Gino, that Jenna El Alfie, if she's healthy, could be a really great player at that position. But yeah, you got to feel like they're going to be the favorites to win it all again, and they're certainly going to be in the conversation to win it all again. But again, they've got to stay healthy, and you feel like they've got to have better luck with injuries of it someday.
Yeah.
But it's 3 years in a row that this has happened. I'm at a loss to explain it. But yeah, if they could stay healthy, you got to like their chances with what they have coming back. And a lot of the other teams, a lot of the other good teams, they're losing people in the portal.
Yeah.
And I still feel like UConn is in a position, just like the men's team, is in a position where they're not going to necessarily lose players in the portal that
Right.
play, and they're probably going to get almost any player they want through the portal.
Yeah. I should have asked this back when we were talking the men's team. Slipped my mind. Did you ever think for a minute that Dan Hurley was going to Kentucky?
I'll be honest with you. If I were if I had a rooting interest in this, I would have held my breath until Kentucky filled that position, because they have unlimited football funded SEC money to throw at it. And they could literally, if they really wanted him badly enough, they could have doubled his salary, tripled his salary. They might have offered him that. I mean, the rumor was, right, there was a report that they offered him $11 million a year. So, he is that rare guy, and I give him endless credit for this. He's that rare guy who actually said, when you make as much as I do, what's the difference whether you're making this many million or this many million?
Yeah.
Now, we all look at athletes and coaches who jump to get 16 million instead of 14, or
Hmm.
25 million instead of 22 million. And you wonder, what are they thinking? Why are they messing with a good situation to chase a few more dollars when they've already got more money than even their grandkids could ever spend? But I give Dan credit. He did not mess with happiness. He you know he stayed where he was happy and was making enough money. He's going to make more money. He's going to get a raise. We know
Hmm.
that. But yeah, I mean, I would have worried about it until the very moment that Kentucky got Pope in there, because you just didn't know what they might throw at Dan to turn his head.
Yeah. Now we got a fun game apparently between Baylor and UConn with the two coaches who turned down Kentucky. So
Yeah,
we'll have that
yeah.
matchup in the fall again. I'm going to take a quick break from the interview to tell you about my friends at Martin Rosol's Meats. This fourth generation Connecticut family business produces kielbasa, hot dogs, sausages, and deli meats using Martin Rosol's very own original recipes. Their products can be found in grocery stores, delis, restaurants, and hot dog stands throughout the state. If you're looking for your fill right away, check out their retail store in New Britain. For more information, visit martinroselsinc.com and go support a UConn fan-owned business. And now, back to the interview. We're moving on from basketball now. Now I think everyone can fully turn their attention. I mean, even though there's portal action, you can turn most of your attention to baseball if that's your liking. Give us some thoughts so far in the early month and change of the baseball season.
Well, if you're the Yankees, it's hard to find fault with 16-8, but they're the Yankees and Yankee fans, and they're certainly going to find fault with it. Um, their up and down hitting is kind of a mystery to me. And, you wonder what's wrong with Aaron Judge, if he has an oblique problem, or if his foot has caused him to change his swing, or what's going on, or if it's just a slump, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but you have to feel that it's 16-8 when they've gotten so little from him.
Yeah.
They've gotten great starting pitching with Cole out. You figure you get Cole back Memorial Day or June or whenever you get him back. You got to like the position that they're in. Baltimore is really, really good, and I don't know that the Yankees over their 162 games can outlast Baltimore right now, but they certainly would be in position to get a wild card. So, again, hard to find fault with what the Yankees have done so far, but they're the Yankees and people will find fault with it. Um, Red Sox, they've done a little better, I think, than people thought. They have I think, an interesting young team. This is an unforgiving division that's going to make it difficult for them to make a move this year. But, they made a move a couple of years ago to blow everything up and rebuild the farm system. And you look at the talent that they've got stacked up at Portland now, you feel like, maybe they're on the verge to harvesting some fruit from that. So they're probably a year or two away from being what you expect the Red Sox to be. But I certainly wouldn't write them off. They've got some very good young players there. And As far as the Mets go, after a horrible start, they've turned it around a little bit and they're doing a little bit better. Um, and they're going to get their ace back sooner or later. So, it could be an interesting, we expected a fun, exciting summer last year and you didn't get it in these parts. You might get that this year.
One of the big Yankee news items of the first month is your friend John Sterling deciding to retire there. What were your thoughts when you heard the news that he was going to be stepping away?
Well, I thank you for asking, Jared. Um, well, you're gonna get. He's a friend of mine, and so I knew that
Yeah.
he was thinking along those lines. He had planned, I know, to do the first road trip and then just do East Coast games, about 115 games. That was his
Okay.
plan. And but that first road trip just took so much out of him. But
Hmm.
I could tell when I had dinner with him in January in New York that he wasn't looking forward to the season, that he was almost dreading the end of the off season and the start of the season. And this is a guy who loves what he does. He
I
loved
was going
what
to
he
say
does.
that. Yeah.
And not only did he love he never stopped working because he would do everything he could possibly do. I mean, even a few years ago, he was doing Ivy League games on the Yes Network in the off season. I mean, he would do video. Would record for video games.
Yeah.
He would do the Nets, the Islanders. He would do everything that he could. He just loved being on the air. So that kind of got my attention a little bit. And so I think, and again, if you listen to the last couple of games he did, sounded like he always did. Voice sounded great. But I think, and I know, even because even at my much younger age, that dragging yourself to the ballpark every day, getting home at 2 in the morning, for somebody his age, it had to be it had to have gotten very difficult. So he's remarkable for 86, but he is 86,
Yeah.
and I'm just glad that he's he's leaving on his own terms. He left his
For
own
sure.
way. He got some of the appreciation that was sometimes denied him
Hmm.
because people would kind of goof on him a little bit. I'm glad he got I'm glad he got to really feel, and it surprised him and touched him
Yeah.
how much people adored him. I'm glad he got to people had a chance to say goodbye, and he got a chance to soak that in a little bit. So I wish him the best. It wouldn't surprise me if he maybe comes back when they need a fill in or something. It wouldn't shock me if he came back for a game here or a game there. But I think he did it as long as he could, and I think he really felt he had nothing more to give.
Yeah. No, I think anytime you go out on your own terms too is always the way
You
to.
know, we all like to see that, to go
Yeah.
out on our own terms, see people we like go out on your own terms. But if your own terms are that you're going to do it forever, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he very nearly pulled that off.
I've got to ask, just based on your friendship with him and working with him, favorite John Sterling memory that you've got in terms of a good story for us.
Some of them I probably can't tell you, but um, well, like John and I, along with Anthony McCarron and Pete Caldera and Sweeney Murdy, we really like nice restaurants. So he started to gravitate toward us because he knew that we would, especially after he would actually go usually with Joe Torre and the coaches because
Okay.
Joe loved him, but every once in a while he was looking for dinner company, and I always remember one time I checked into the hotel in San Francisco, one of the great restaurant cities out there, and as soon as I checked in, there was my light was flashing. I got a message, and I called it up, and it's him on voicemail saying, Dom, this is John Sterling. Now, I don't know where you and Anthony and Pete are going to dinner tonight, but knowing the three of you, it's someplace yummy. So please include me in your plans. And so we started having dinner with him more regularly after that, and he's wonderful dinner company because he can
Yeah.
talk
Oh, I
about.
bet.
He's very well read. He's oblivious to the internet and social media, but he reads traditional media vociferously, and he knows about everything, and he could talk about anything. But the one thing I have to say is, he John would never wear his pass. Would
Mhm.
never wear it, And when you asked him about it or told or asked him to wear it, he would always say, well, if they don't know who I am by now. Well, in 2001, after 9/11, an edict came down from Major League Baseball that everyone had to wear a pass, no exceptions. Everyone had to wear a pass. So they sent a Yankee employee, the media relations person, to go and talk to him to try to convince him to wear his pass, knowing how he felt. So he's talking to him and he's trying to be reasonable. And he's saying, John, you have to wear your pass. I know it's silly. I know everyone knows who you are, but after what happened, the security's tight. You have to wear your pass. And John is nodding his head, going, I see, I understand. So he thinks the other guy thinks, you know what, I'm getting through to him. This is going to work. He goes, so John, please, someone's going to lose their job if you're not wearing a pass, whoever let you in. So please wear your pass. And John just goes, well, if this isn't the most unimportant conversation I've ever had. And he turned around and walked away. And, a good 20 years later, there was a big profile of John in the New York Times, and I picked it up to read it. And the first line in the story, the lead of the story was, John Sterling does not wear a pass. He still didn't wear a pass. And it was the first thing that people noticed because Brian Cashman wears a pass. Brian Cashman wears his pass, his ID. John Sterling, and he retired, never wearing his pass.
There we go. That's a good one. So this is why you tune into this podcast. You get great stories like that. While I have you on the favorite John Sterling memory there, do you have a favorite call of his, a home run call?
The Bam Tino always struck me funny because it was such a reach.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like so silly, but then it grew on you. And then, of course, you had to have one, for everyone. But a few years ago, when the Yankees had a rash of injuries and they had a bunch of no-name players coming in, Mike Vaccaro was out on the West Coast and he had to do an early story. So he talked to John about coming up with nicknames for all these guys that had just joined the team within a week. And John mentioned that the one guy that had him stumped was Gio Urshela. Couldn't think of one.
Yeah.
So knowing how much John loved Broadway, I you can't text John because he has a flip phone, doesn't do texts. So I texted Caldera out there and said, tell John to try Gio Urshela, The Most Happy Fella, because that was a Broadway show,
Yeah.
The Most Happy Fella. The marquee song from it is Standing on the Corner Watching All the Girls Go By. Bobby Darin made it, Dean Martin. So I knew that was right in his wheelhouse. And well, they're on the West Coast, and 11 o'clock at night, I actually went to sleep. And Gio Urshela hits a home run. And John breaks out. Not only does he break out with Gio Urshela, The Most Happy Fella, but he starts singing the theme song or the main title song to The Most Happy Fella. So my phone just starts going off. Everyone who heard it's texting me. And the Yes Network goes into the Meredith goes into the booth to talk, and he gives me credit on the air, which is the only thing that really mattered. And the next morning, they play that on FAN, and Boomer Esiason starts ripping me because I gave him The Most Happy Fella, which I thought was a badge of honor. So I guess I'll always have a warm spot for that one because I gave it to him. And then a couple of years ago during the playoffs, we're having dinner in the dining room, and I said, John, everybody hates this Harrison Bader trade, this Montgomery for Bader trade, and he goes, yeah, Dom, it's amazing. We haven't even seen Bader play yet, and people really. And I said, well, as soon as he hits his first home run, everyone's going to be just wild about Harry. And he just pointed to me and said, "That's it." And of course, he hit a home run that night, and so those are the two that you can blame me for.
I was just gonna say, as you were before I even asked you this question, I was gonna say, does he ever workshop these with you guys at the dinners? And you went right into it. So
no, he does not workshop with us. We'll workshop with him, but he does not. Now, if he's got in mind what he wants to do,
yeah,
he's going to do it. He doesn't need to bounce it off anybody because he does not. He doesn't care what people think, as he said once told me. I do what I do the way that I do it, and people can like it or not like it, but he just does what he does. He is who he is, which is why there's only one of him and you can't replace him. Yeah, I know one time, when Matsui joined the Yankees, they tried to talk him out of doing A-bomb for A-Rod because there were obviously a lot of Japanese listeners. The games were on in Japan. So he wanted to try to talk him out of that, but he I
Yeah.
guess that was the second most unimportant conversation he ever had.
Well, before we wrap, my favorite, the Grandy Man. You go into that one. One of
Well,
my
whenever he starts singing,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
whenever, one time, this is after I left the beat, but I was listening, I was driving around, had the game on the radio, and Jeremy Sowers is pitching for Cleveland. So John says to Susan, I walked past Eric Wedge's office today. He's the manager, and he was so happy he was singing. He was singing, "Oh, Jeremy Sowers will pitch today. He'll go 9 innings. I hope and pray." So I almost drove off the road laughing so hard at that. So a few days later, I'm at the game having dinner with John and Susan, as we would tend to do in the dining room. And I said, John, I got to tell you, when you started singing Jeremy Sowers, instead of April Showers, I just, I almost drove off the road. So Susan kicks me under the table. Says, don't encourage him, Dom. Don't encourage him. So, later on, next time I was there, Jason Giambi used to have a leopard skin thong that he passed around the clubhouse. If somebody was in a slump, he would hang it in his locker, and it would supposedly good luck to break the slump. And Giambi was in a slump, and he put the thong in his locker, and he started hitting. So I'm sitting with John and Susan having dinner, and I said, John, I walked by Jason Giambi today, and he was so happy he was singing. He was singing, "Without a thong, this slump would never end. Without a thong, I'd never hit again." So John just looked at me and winked, and Susan just glared at me. And after the game, we're in the hallway waiting to get into Girardi's office, and Susan comes stomping down the hallway, whacks me, and says, "He sang your effing song. Are you happy?"
Look at that. I never
So,
realized.
John and I just knew the man's wheelhouse. I know the
Yeah,
man's wheelhouse, and yeah, he was endless fun. He's just, he's a wonderful, entertaining, funny guy, and
yeah,
talk about a guy that just had it all figured out. He loved life. He loves life,
yeah,
and I'm glad he's going to get to spend some time with his children now, and maybe his grand. He had children late in life, and
yeah.
they're grown up now. But he just he's one. And we're gonna, we're gonna have dinner. It's like we at the press conference. I asked him a question, and he fires back at me. Are we gonna have dinner soon? So it was like almost like the Caitlin Clark press conference in reverse. He was like engaging me. But yeah, so yeah, I can't wait to sit down and have dinner with him and talk to him. And he's just a wonderful one of the best things about covering the Yankees was having him as my friend.
You mentioned the press conference, so I've got to end with this one because I was listening to it was one of the Ringer podcasts, the Press Box, and they were talking about the idea of the press conference in modern day sports and if it's something that should still even be happening. You've been doing this for a while. What are your thoughts on the press conference and maybe what it's
Well,
turned
it's
into?
unavoidable that you have to have them because there's just too many. You can't expect somebody to do 15 or 20 or
Yeah,
30 one-on-ones. But buffoonish look at me behavior at press conferences has become something of an epidemic. And let me tell you, the Caitlin Clark got a lot of attention for obvious reasons, but there was that kind of thing, and you were there probably for a lot of them. Every Hurley press conference had somebody, "Hey, look at me, look how tight I am with Dan Hurley. I could bust his stones about this or that." And Dan, being Dan, kind of went along with it, but that kind of thing just goes on at press conferences everywhere. And I'm old school, and even though I've covered these guys for years every day, I identify myself when that's what they want you to do and ask my question. And if I want to have some private tete-a-tete, I do that you do afterward.
right.
But you see, I mean, the Calhoun dime back thing, that was somebody who's not even a reporter who kind of lied
Yeah.
his way into the press conference, frankly. There should not have been there. The Dave Solomon one with Brian Gomes, well, he asked a question that Jim didn't like, and Jim reacted the way he reacted. There's nothing wrong with the question. But yeah, it's unavoidable that you have to have press conferences, but I just wish that there was a little bit more decorum,
Mhm.
especially from people who've been around a long time and should know better
Yeah.
than to just act buffoonish and, "Hey, look at me, look at me, look at me," because it's about the person on the podium. It's not about you.
Yeah. No. Well, Dom, as always, I really enjoy having these conversations. So you get to hit on a number of topics. Next time you come on, I want
You
to
get your
hear.
break from Dan Hurley, right? Yeah.
Next time you're on, I want to hear some John Sterling type songs about maybe some of the UConn players, Dan Hurley. That's your assignment for the next time on. I want to hear them. I know you can come up with them now.
Well, he had Dominique as Magnifique when he did the Hawks in Atlanta those
Yeah,
later years. So he would have them for basketball. I mean,
there we go.
he would have one for the 3-pointers for
Yeah,
sure.
there we go. There we go. He'd like the carabang. I feel like he'd get into that one.
He'd get into that. Yeah, he'd have something on Newton with the dialing it up, or
Yeah.
he'd have that. And yeah, no, he would definitely Kling Kong. He would
Oh, he
definitely
would have
have.
liked that one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
All right. All right. Well, next time you have dinner, get a couple for us and see if we can work
I'll
that.
run it by him. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dom, as always, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, you got it, Jared. Anytime.